then Marge. Okay.
I'm afraid I don't have a very cheerful story to tell, although I yield to no one in the pleasure I have taken in the profession. I want to tell you about how I got my first academic job. I was finishing up my PhD at Berkeley, and the system for getting jobs in those days was rather obscure, but there was a placement officer in the department, and I duly talked to her and explained that I had no academic ambitions, that I wanted only to stay in California and have some place to teach. I was engaged to a man, a non-academic, who was staying in California, and I just wanted to be there too. And she smiled and said nothing. One day I got a phone call from her, and she said, Professor James Work from Indiana University is here in town. He would like to talk to you at 10:30 tomorrow morning. I said, I don't want to go to Indiana. She said, Professor Work will be waiting for you at 10:30. So I showed up at 10:30 and I introduced myself and I said, Mr. Work, I should tell you at the outset, I have no interest in teaching in Indiana. And he said, well, that's just fine because we really have no interest in hiring women. So I was greatly relieved by this. It reduced the sense of strain, and we then had a very pleasant conversation for about half an hour. And then he inquired about my plans for writing after my dissertation. And I said, truthfully, I have no plans for writing after my dissertation. I don't think I'll ever write anything again. So there was a silence, and then he laughed, and he said, you know, I think you're wrong. And the next day, he offered me a very good job. And I didn't want that job, but it was made clear to me that Berkeley wanted its graduates to fan out across the country and improve the reputation of the university, and that they would give me no help in getting any other job. And so that's how I got to Indiana University. Now, I hardly need to say anything about how that differs from any conceivable scenario today. It's very hard to get a job you don't want that easily. I'm going to talk mainly about the job market, but also about its implications for the profession, what I know and what I fear about that. The MLA statistics this year made their way to the New York Times, where they made an impression on a lot of people who had no particular interest in the field of literature. The MLA reported, and the Times reported, that there had been a 49% drop from last year to this year in the opening jobs available to people in English. And that was on top of a 29% drop the year before from the year before that. Those are very alarming statistics. Now, there have, of course, been difficult situations for jobs before, many times before. I don't think they have worked out quite the same way. I remember vividly one of those when I was teaching at Yale, and it was very hard for even the best graduates of the PhD program to find positions. But there were a lot more non-academic jobs available to them at that time. Many people went into various non-academic lines of work, and there were in due time surveys of the happiness levels of these people, and it turned out they were or claimed to be happier by and large than people who had stayed in academic life. So fine. But now there aren't so many non-academic jobs available, and some new career patterns seem to be developing. One thing that has happened is that postdoctoral programs, which have long been a staple in the sciences, have increased in the humanities, and many more people in our and neighboring disciplines who can't get jobs right after the PhD spend a year or maybe 2 years in postdoctoral programs and prepare their dissertations for publication. Then they often accept jobs at institutions that they would not have imagined themselves teaching at, institutions where there are high teaching loads, few research opportunities, often very limited libraries, and they spend 2 or 3 or 4 years at such institutions, and then, with luck, get a tenure-track job at an institution where they're willing to stay. By this time, they have spent 4 or 5 or 6 years already in a kind of preliminary stage, and then they have 6 years more before they come up for tenure. Meanwhile, the people who are coming out with fresh PhDs have to compete not only with their peers, but with the really considerable cohort of people who are applying for beginning assistant professorships, having already published or being about to publish their first books. And moreover, they have often had postdoctoral teaching experience too. So they are very attractive candidates. Our hypothetical person who is going along toward 12 years before tenure faces higher requirements for tenure than I did. Many places now require 2 books for tenure, or at least healthy progress toward a second book. All of these facts, I think, have consequences for the way the discipline is pursued. I'm not going to talk about the consequences right now, although maybe we can talk about them later, but rather about my uninformed predictions for the future, uninformed in the sense that all predictions about the future are necessarily uninformed. I'm worried that, unlike previous situations in which the job market has been constricted, that this time, when the economy loosens up and there are more jobs available, the situation of people in literary studies is still not going to be very good. For one thing, you all know about the number of adjuncts. I just recently came across the most recent statistics about adjuncts in the field of English. The most recent statistics are from 2007, 2008, and I expect the figures are worse now. In 2007, 2008, 49% of the faculties in colleges and universities across the country were adjuncts. This is a really startling figure, especially if one considers that it's likely to be worse now. Some of these adjuncts were teaching advanced courses to undergraduates. Adjuncts don't count graduate students. There are a lot of graduate students teaching across the country too. I have recently visited a state university where the adjuncts are, where the graduate students are teaching more than 35% of the advanced courses in English. From an administrative point of view, this is a bargain. As we know, they don't get paid well, and they don't get benefits. They are a cheap teaching resource. Other disciplines use adjuncts too, and of course, not being inside the other disciplines, maybe there are things that I don't know that predict that there too administrators would be likely to continue the system that is so economically advantageous. But I think there's another problem with literary studies. A few years ago, as president of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, I traveled around the country talking with groups of fellows in various places. And the people who appeared for these meetings were by and large mostly scientists, not entirely scientists, but mostly scientists. Almost invariably, in the course of a couple of hours of conversation, somebody would ask me, what is it that English departments are doing now? I can't understand what's going on in the English department. These questions were not asked with hostility. They were asked with genuine bewilderment, as far as I could tell. And so I would try to explain what English departments were doing in the most positive possible terms, and nobody was ever impressed. Nobody seemed to feel that what was going on was something that was worth going on. Many of you will remember the culture wars of the 90s. There was a very effective right-wing media campaign which alleged that Shakespeare wasn't being taught in the United States anymore. And there was also, as I recall, they alleged that Their Eyes Were Watching God had replaced Moby Dick on the English department curriculum around the country. So the MLA inaugurated a very careful and very thorough statistical study of what was actually taught in what was actually listed in the curricula of colleges and universities. They got an extraordinarily high rate of return, and they had very persuasive, I thought, statistics showing that in the first place that Shakespeare was taught everywhere, and in the second place that Moby Dick and Huckleberry Finn and all the other books that people seem to be concerned about were also being taught. I was president of the MLA in 1994, and I was assigned the job of conducting a press conference to reveal the findings of this study. I was equipped with charts and with a lot of data, and I duly made my presentation. And the moment I finished, a distinguished journalist jumped up from his chair and said, "You're lying." I learned from that two things. One was that facts, at least the kind of facts that can be measured in statistics, don't make the slightest difference in arguments of this kind. And the other thing was that another kind of facts of feeling, makes an enormous difference, that there were very intense feelings about this matter. I had already realized that the success of this campaign indicated that American people in general had strong feelings about the teaching of English and American literature, that they believed it made an enormous difference whether Shakespeare was taught or wasn't taught, whether Huckleberry Finn was taught or wasn't taught. And I think that's still true. I also think it's true that we have not succeeded in communicating to the American people in general what it is that we're doing now with the texts that we teach, with the familiar texts that we teach, and with the unfamiliar texts that we teach. And more serious, from my immediate point of view, I'm not sure that that has been communicated even within our institutions to people in other fields than our own. There is a real communications problem in our discipline, I believe, and if things don't get better, if the job situation and so on, I think that we will bear a good deal of the responsibility for that. And I wish I knew what it was possible to recommend to do about it.